Hello, and welcome to Live Vedanta, a podcast about simple living and high thinking. Currently, we are amidst a mini series on the sea change moments in our life, the moments of transition that have transformed us. It has been powerful to engage in these conversations, and it has been powerful to hear from all of you. I'm going to keep this message at the top of the episode, but if you like what you're hearing and you want more people to find Live Vedanta, we always appreciate your reviews on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Again, it allows more people to engage in self-development in this deep and authentic way. In this episode, I am excited to sit down with Prem, and I'll just let him introduce himself.
So my name is Prem. I'm currently living in London. I spent the last almost decade in the US. That's about it.
I guess maybe more specifically, what brought you to the US and then what brought you back to London?
Sure. So I went to the US when I was 18. I just finished up with school and I was considering what I wanted to do next. And at this age, I was very adventurous. And I just thought, most of my friends would be going somewhere in the UK. Why not cross the Atlantic and try and find a university there? So I went from central London to the Berkshire Mountains of Massachusetts for my undergrad. And it was a fantastic experience. I spent 4 years there. Then after that, I traveled or rather transitioned to Boston, where I started working, spent 3 years there. And then I moved to Chicago after that, most recently for grad school. And now I've moved back to the UK. So over the 9-year time horizon, I've had quite a few sort of transition periods.
As we think about your journey from so many geographic regions, how have you noticed yourself change across those moves as you're looking back on this era of life?
There's a lot of physical transitions that have happened from one location environment to another. But I think the greatest transition for me actually happened maybe in the period where I had the least movement. And for me, that was in Boston, actually, during the pandemic, when I was really in the same place the whole time, which was at home. The transition happened quite internally, I would say. Work was really challenging at the time. The company I was at, it was in consulting field, lost a lot of clients. The environment became one of survival. The work hours became pretty extreme and morale was generally quite low. So that was a tough environment to be in. Socially, it was really isolating. My family were in the UK. Well, they were in India for the first part of the pandemic, but then they moved back to the UK. And I didn't have so many friends from university, from college in Boston. And so definitely isolated there as well. And actually, as a funny story, at the beginning of the pandemic, we're probably about 4 weeks in. And so it was kind of beginning of April. Mm-hmm. And I was ordering online grocery through Amazon because I was too scared to go into the grocery store because everyone thought, your plastic bags can get contaminated and whatnot. But eventually there was no more grocery store orders available, no slots available online, and I had to eat. There's only so much dry food you can eat. And so I finally mustered the courage to go to a Stop and Shop, which was the local grocery store. I remember sneaking in at 7 a.m. So before everyone was there, wearing 2 masks, a balaclava, and a double pair of gloves, just because I was so precautious about what could happen. And I remember really, swiftly collecting all of my goods, going to the checkout, and then I was silent. And as I finished bagging the groceries, I was really startled to hear this voice. And the voice was the lady at the checkout. And she asked me basically whether I wanted to pay by cash or by card. And I realized that this was the first time a human being had spoken to me in person in a month. So that was the nature of the isolation there. Now, that sounds like maybe it sounds like the start of a sad story, but really it was far from it. I think that period of COVID really, and being in Boston, although I was stagnant, served as the greatest period of growth for me. And so that's probably the most meaningful transition, even though it didn't occur across space.
Were you used to living alone?
I'd done a little bit of living alone in college. So I actually managed to get a single every year.
Hmm.
That's one of the good things about going to school in the middle of nowhere. So they have a lot of dorms. So from that perspective, yeah, but it's very different. Like dorm living, everyone's got their, doors unlocked. You just cross the building and you get to someone else. You're having classes with other people. You're eating every meal together. So this was the real first bit of isolation I'd say I'd experienced. So yeah, it was a very different experience to know that you couldn't just kind of go down the road and see someone or call someone, especially in those early stages of the pandemic where, minimal contact, etc. And so that was, yeah, I think that was probably the first time I had to reckon with what it meant to just be with myself.
I mean, one, I'm actually being transported to that time myself. We were both living alone, right? Like
Hmm.
a deep comfort with being by oneself is needed at a
Absolutely.
certain point. How did that develop for you?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. That was the greatest import of that time for me was comfort in being alone. And I think this skill is just so needed in today's world. For me, it developed really just through my association with Chinmaya Mission. So I got involved in the local CM center in Boston. I co-taught Bar Vihar, which was done on Zoom. So I built some community there. And it also served to direct some of my energy over the weekend when I would have been out and about meeting friends. I'm now studying for this class that I'm going to help teach. The other thing was CM Niagara got very involved as the pandemic went on, joined the Thursday Gita class, which started in person with Nina, but later became by yourself at home looking at a screen. And then through Seva, also through CM Niagara. So the big initiative at that time was raising money for CVV, Chinmaya Mission. And that was a huge effort of crowdfunding all across the US. And it was sort of all intensive, all hands on deck, trying to inspire people to open pages and donate money to this cause far away. So I think one thing was surrounding myself with seva and really meaningful work that allowed me to channel some of that energy that might have been spent on going out, seeing people, etc. The second thing I'd say is finding community in all of that as well, and finding connection without having to be in person with people. And then finally, also just having some perspective then on the isolation and reframing it from being lonely to alone.
How would you define that difference?
So I think lonely is a sort of value judgment that my isolation is leading to a feeling of being lonely, of being like I don't have people with me, that I'm on my own. And I think alone is sort of empowering yourself to take control over that. It's recognizing that we are all kind of on our own journey, on our own path. And there's nothing necessarily lonely about that. I'm still on this transition, but I think in sort of embracing that, there's a lot of value in being comfortable with your own company and not seeking sort of external things. That's a really empowering thought. And I think it took me the whole kind of length of the pandemic to get there. And it's been really transformative, I'd say. Like the comfort in being alone, it allows you to really paradoxically show up in spaces and be more confident in oneself and actually deepen connections because there's not as much of a sort of dependency I find on the other person. When you love your own company, for instance, there's no FOMO because if there's a great, social scene that you could go to, I know the best alternative is a night with me. And by the end of the pandemic, I loved that. And so there's no sense of FOMO. So that was a really empowering thought and really just came through association with this community and understanding really my true purpose and what the journey looks like.
It sounds like a catalyst for a lot of this was seva or service.
Mhm.
How did you find it translating into sadhana or studying yourself?
Mm. It's an excellent question, and I think it definitely does. Like the most tangible way is just through interacting with other people who take their sadhana very seriously and being inspired by those people, not in necessarily their words, because not that many people talk about it, but in the way that they approach their seva. You see just the purity, you see the dedication and the discipline, and you go, wow, like how is this person able to be so balanced in the way that they approach things, or so thoughtful, or so dedicated? And then you start to realize that it's because of these small practices that they put in every day, whether it's japa, whether it's waking up really early, whether it's journaling, whatever these little sadhana practices that they put in place, that's what really centers them. And so I think in interacting with people within the community through these seva initiatives, that was a really helpful way for me to see sadhana in action and then want to desire that as well. And then the second is, so there's a satsanga element, and then there's the study element. So in Vivekji's classes, you hear about all these practices because Vivekji makes all the text so practical, and there's always a import at the end. You know exactly what your kind of action items are. And so just trying out all of those out, all of the rads, all of the raws, and then slowly seeing what works for me and incorporating that in my own routine and seeing the impact of that. And also, I felt like I didn't really have any excuse because what else was I going to do? Like, sure, work had long hours and, Seva was also intensive. But if I didn't make the time during the pandemic, like, when would I ever really make the time? And so I felt like it was the universe's way of telling me that you're cutting out all the excuses, really. And so I had to go for it, and that's where I made the transition, kind of from satsanga to seva to sadhana.
Well, I'm just waiting for the train to pass. The perks of living where I live. Everything's honking for no reason. Actually, whenever my mom visits me, she just kind of sits near the window and is like, "Oh, it reminds me of Kolkata." I'm like, which is I find so
That's so
like
cute.
it is so cute. It's going to take another minute before it zooms off away. That's okay. How are you feeling? How is this feeling for you? Are you nervous? Are you okay?
I think I was a little bit at the beginning, but I'm trying to talk. I have notes and stuff, and I was like, don't look at the notes, just speak.
Yeah, just speak. It's
Yeah.
just a conversation. Yeah, there's no right or wrong here. And I feel like you're covering all of the things that feel very Prem to me, feel
Okay,
very
good.
essential to you.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm also fearful of coming off as like inauthentic in any way. So if I am, just let me know.
I don't think you're coming off inauthentic. I think you're coming off genuine.
Okay, good.
I think so long as you mean what you say, then I think we're fine. I mean, is there a specific sadhana practice that not I don't know if enjoyed is the right word, but you found yourself gravitating towards as you're observing other people, you're in all of these classes, you had this time by yourself. How do you like to get to know you?
Mm. I think it was the whole system for me. I struggle to point to one. I think each element of the system that I created, or I didn't create it, sorry. Each element of the system that I imbued from the community, each of them in combination really did it for me. So for most of the pandemic, it was waking up early, brushing my teeth,
Mm-hmm.
and sitting down to do some japa. Now, when I first started doing japa, I really struggled just with the mala. And so I started with likita japa, and I would write down my mantra um, over a page or two every morning and write slowly. Like I'm quite a rajasic person, so I write quickly, I eat quickly, I talk quickly. So I was like, okay, let me use this to just slow down and write slowly. And then as I sort of found my mind getting quieter and being able to do a full page without wandering, that's when I moved to the mala. And even then, I had to do it with my eyes open so that I could again not be distracted. And then slowly but surely, my eyes would shut, and then I was able to do japa. So that was the first aspect of it. I would say some prayers. I would do a few gratitude exercises, just trying to think of three things I'm grateful for, and trying to get really creative with them too. It's really easy to say, okay, I'm grateful for health, I'm grateful for, having shelter, etc. But can I get really creative? And I always enjoyed that aspect of this of my kind of sadhana routine. And this was all with my eyes shut. So after this was over, I would then go pen to paper and do some introspection. And the framework that I really liked was thinking about all the behaviors of the past day where I am happy with how I acted. So all of the positive things there where I behaved in accordance with my values. And then flipping it around and saying, where am I disappointed in the way that I acted? It could be in a client meeting, it could be in snacking too much, whatever it may be. And trying to list that down and then breaking that down even further to think, okay, what was the environment in which that happened? What were the thoughts running through my mind? And then I think as you begin to peel the onion, you start to go to tap into some of, okay, what are the vasanas? What are those? What's the blueprint that's really driving a lot of my behaviors? And that was a really cool process. And that I think helped really unfold my personality in ways that you just can't recognize by thinking in the moment. It was that detachment of writing something on a piece of paper that makes it feel like it's not quite you. And so you can analyze it a little bit more critically. So I'd say really it was the japa, it was the journaling, and then I would listen to Meaningful Mornings, which was the best part of the day for sure. That 15 minutes in the morning, it was such an innovative thing at the time, to be able to connect with a community who was going through the same COVID experience, but day in, day out would come and listen to Vivekji for 15 minutes of inspiration. That whole routine, I actually miss to some extent. I still have a version of that now, but it was just a little different during COVID when everyone's going through it together.
Yeah.
And that really helped to keep me balanced, I think, during the pandemic.
Yeah, I really appreciate you being so specific and describing what you would do because
Mm,
and hearing you share even just the process of developing a relationship with the japa, it feels like a lot more accessible. And
mm,
I think particularly for younger folks that we've both worked with, it just some of these practices feel so distant and far
mm,
away, but actually doing it first with Likita Japa and just writing and then transitioning with one's eyes open and then eyes closed. There's like a process
mm.
of developing that comfort. I don't know. This is just me reflecting out loud.
Yeah, no, I mean it's hard. Like all of these practices are hard, and I think when they were written, our minds had a lot more power to be able to focus, to be able to like. There's so many distractions these days. It's a lot more challenging. So I find just accepting that I am a complete novice and beginner helps me to be able to find a practice that works for me and slowly build up to what's written and what you think to be right. So yeah, I mean, advice there for anyone who's just starting is do it as simply as possible. The goal is really just to calm your mind and make it simple, single pointed. If it's japa, if it's just looking at a candle, if it's walking, whatever it is for you to start off, just stick with it. That's the main thing. I think the consistency of me doing it every day was the value, and over time it grew.
I'm going to ask you a question that I think is one that I've heard many people who are in college ask, which is
Mm,
why is it important to do this now? Isn't it important for me to focus on my career? And then this, like, yes, I recognize self development is cool, is important, but I see that for my later self. Aren't I supposed to focus on like being in a high powered job, getting into a good grad school, et cetera, et cetera?
mm. I would encourage them to ask anyone over the age of 50 or 60 what drives their fulfillment. And I think that you'll find that most of the stuff that you think is really important in those early stages, getting a good job, getting into the right university, etc., is not what drives people's fulfillment. It's a lot of the smaller things. It's the time with family, it's the walks in nature, it's the deep, meaningful connection with people. And so that's one thing, is to speak to older people and understand really what matters and where do they get their happiness. The second thing, to answer your question a bit more directly, is self-development has such deep and profound impact on people that it makes you, it sort of transgresses time. I found it to be incredibly helpful in this phase of life as the lens through which I kind of view everything. And if you look at it in a purely secular way, these practices like meditation, like introspection, etc., it makes you a better employee. It makes you more effective at studying. And these may not be the primary reasons why we do it, but even if it is, then so be it. And I think that the the way that self-development has impacted me in this early stage of life, I just feel so grateful for. And if you speak to a lot of seekers later in life, they almost all say, I wish I started earlier. And frankly, I even speak to, 12, 15-year olds who are already studying. And I'm like, wow, I wish I started at your age because there's so much wrong thinking and so many mistakes that could be avoided with the right type of perspective. It's never really too early to start, whether you have spiritual goals or you have material goals. I think there's room for spiritual self-development really early on in one's life, and the earlier you can get it, the more fortunate you are.
Yeah, it's almost like in investing in spiritual self-development, there's actually no negative in any
Mm,
way. It doesn't actually detract anyone from pursuing their goals. If anything, it makes them more effective in those goals.
right.
There's no loss. Now, as I'm reflecting on the question I asked you, it's presenting something that's mutually exclusive, that which in reality is not mutually exclusive. It isn't,
Mm,
it isn't career, university, or self-development. These are like simultaneous.
yeah, 100%. And I think some areas where people feel they are exclusive is when we think about things like detachment and renouncing the world, etc. And they say, well, how am I supposed to renounce the world when I've got all these desires and, I want to be an effective student, etc., etc. But I think the fundamental principle there is still incredibly valuable, which is, let's just take renouncing. Can you, instead of renouncing the world, can you renounce your attachment to results or your attachment to certain things? Then suddenly it becomes less about this absolutist way of, I'm going to go sit under a tree and meditate, and a little bit more about how do I interact with the world in a way that gives me and others the most happiness. And it's doing so as much as you can in a detached way, in a save our forward way, and so on and so forth. So I think the fundamental principles really apply throughout one's life. And
Mhm.
I'll reiterate it again, the earlier you start, the more grateful you will be in the long term and the more blessed that you are, really.
As you're thinking about this next chapter of your life, of yourself,
Mm.
what are you most looking forward to?
So I've now moved back to the UK. I've spent the nice last decade or so out in the US, and I think the main motivator for me coming back was being close to my family. Um, I'm now living at home, so I have really close proximity to them, and it's just completely different to when I was out in the US and having kind of weekly calls with them and texting them occasionally. Just the ability to step outside of my room and see both my parents there, to see my brother who lives a few minutes away from us. It's a complete game changer. It feels like I'm almost reintegrating into the family. That's one thing, is sort of being closer to my family and nurturing that side of my relationships that I wasn't able to nurture in distance. That I would say is the primary one. And then there's all these secondary things of connecting with older friends that I used to have in my school and such. All the fun things that you can do around London. I think British comedy, for instance, is the best. And so I love going to comedy clubs and hearing stand up comedians.
Do you do
Um,
stand up yourself, Prem?
I don't do stand up, but I've done improv comedy classes in grad school, which was a ton of fun. And so maybe nurturing that side too.
I love that. I love imagining you doing improv. What did you notice about yourself when doing improv?
Well, one like really critical learning I found was that humor just happens. You don't really have to try hard. I remember our instructor would always say, "Don't try and be the funny person. Life is inherently funny. Just stick with the bit, build off what someone says, and humor just happens." And I think that just took a lot of the pressure off you to be funny, and you realize like actually life can be quite hilarious just naturally. You don't need a wise guy or a comedian to come in and say anything clever. And so that's a really beautiful thought, how we're all just one moment away from bursting out laughing.
I like that. Right, because like I like that because so often I feel like societally we're like everyone's one step away from insert really negative thing happening. And actually I like the reframe of, hey, we're actually always one moment away from something really funny happening. I
Yeah,
think that's like a much more joyful reframe.
yeah, exactly. At any moment, you and I could just be on the floor laughing uncontrollably. I don't quite have the joke for that right now, but
Yeah,
one
I
day
know.
maybe.
Yeah, don't try to be funny, Prem, right?
Well played, Dina.
As someone who did not go to business school, in my head, it feels like a very fast paced and a little bit Rajasic environment. Like there's a
Mm.
lot of intensity in all directions, maybe. How did this transitional period during COVID support you or help you as you were moving into this? Like the world is almost cracking open again and you're surrounded by
Mm.
so many people, almost in the opposite direction.
If I had to summarize the two phases, I would say the pandemic in Boston gave me a comfort in being alone. And then the MBA in Chicago taught me the joy of relationships. I think the MBA environment is very Rajasic. There's no doubt about that. There's so much to do, and everyone's quite type A and exploring all of these amazing things to do. But I think the amazing thing that comes out of that is you meet such incredible people from all over the world, and the conversations I was having with people, I treasure them really much. You can find, the people that are just partying, you can find the people that are mostly studying. I really focused on how do I have really deep conversations with people who have come from incredible backgrounds. And I was in Evanston, so right by the water, which meant it was perfect for long walks by the water while you get reflective chats with people. And that was a really fulfilling part. Like I would just meet someone, for instance, randomly. Let's say we just had a random coffee chat scheduled through a club. And then next thing you know, we're by the water, we're talking about our childhood, we're talking about our religious beliefs, we're talking about, really deep things that have happened in our lives. And this sort of happens within 30 minutes of meeting someone. And this might not be the answer that most people give about their MBA experience, but it's the side of it that I really leaned into. And it's a side that I wasn't really able to nurture while I was in Boston because of the isolation and such. And so that experience for me was incredible in building relationships and really enjoying company of others. And so now coming back to London, I feel I have both of those things. I have a comfort in being alone and also enjoyment in being with others. And I think that I needed both of those experiences to have that perspective.
And as a seeker right now in this period of time, do you have an aspiration for yourself? Is there a virtue or value that you want to live into?
I'd say patience is still one in several angles. I mean, the UK is generally a slower pace of life than the US, so that's an important way for me to slow down. You order something online and it takes 2 to 3 weeks rather than your next day delivery in a lot of cases due to shortages and whatnot. Um, but more seriously, I think being, patient at home with family, being more patient um, as I look for a new opportunity here. I think one thing that I was able to get in the MBA and while I was working is kind of that immediate gratification in some ways, and you learn on the spiritual path that that's just not how it works. You invest so much time and go so slowly and steadily on the spiritual path, and I'm now realizing that that's more of what I have to inculcate while I'm here, so trying to develop patience as much as I can.
Is there anything else that you wanted to share that we didn't talk about if you glanced at your notes?
I think if I was to summarize kind of what one message I would like to get across, it's just the power of loving oneself. It really changes everything. It was the main import of my time alone in Boston and indeed of my MBA and moving back. It really just changes everything. It's the building block of more successful relationships. It allows you to serve more selflessly. And even in a secular sense, it makes you more effective in your work and such. It took me basically a global pandemic for me to get there, but I am just incredibly grateful that I've gotten there at a young age. And given all the challenges that are out there with mental health and whatnot, I hope others find a pathway to loving themselves.
Maybe after listening to Prem, you're curious about the opportunities for self-study available through Chinmaya Mission Niagara. The cool thing is we have one more open home coming up on Monday, September 16th at 8 p.m. Eastern. We have more details on how you can register for this free and virtual tour of our offerings and opportunity to chat with our guides in the show notes or on our website, chinmayaniagara.com. You'll find the registration at the bottom of the page. Well, with that, until next time, inspire, love, be.